أخيا ورتل القرآن اصدح بصوتك اسمع الأكوان اقرأ كلام الله داوي نفوسنا لنحس في أعماقنا الإيمان
كالحجارة قسوة فإذا عن القرآن حين
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another in our series, Reflections on the Quran. So in an earlier episode, we were talking about stories of the Quran, and in the last episode, we talked about the story of Musa and Fir'awn in the Quran, and trying to highlight some of the relevance of this story to us in the world in which we live now, from a historical perspective, a sociological, a political, economic. And we talked about how the story of Musa and Fir'awn takes place in the cradle of civilization, and that one of the features of civilization is centralized governments and hierarchical societies. And these centralized governments, they monopolize force in a society, and they make laws and enforce them. They collect taxes from people, and they frequently provide some kind of services to their peoples also. Particularly in the modern age, it's considered that that's something that they're supposed to do. Even in the classical era, or the very dawn of history, there were positive things that were associated with the rise of these complex societies: the development of writing, the ability to transmit human learning from one generation to another, and the development of specialized professions, the integration of large areas of the earth economically. So rulers had certain positive functions, and sometimes they also had negative functions. And Fir'aun is an example of a bad ruler. And one of the aspects of his personality was that it's my way or the highway. إِنَّمَا أُرِيكُمْ مَا أَرَى. I'm only showing you what I see. And he's telling his people, in other words, what I'm guiding you by is my understanding of how things should be. So it's a one-man situation. He makes the laws, and everybody else obeys. And so you have the sense of him being above the law. The law is by definition what he says. Musa came with a law, and he came with signs that indicated that he wasn't speaking from himself. And so the whole issue of Sharia, a law that everybody is subject to, that's really key to the story of Musa, and it's a very important feature of what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was entrusted to deliver to humanity. And so having the story of Musa repeated more than any other story of the Quran gives us some indicator of that issue of the rule of law, that what prophets do is they bring a law that everybody is subject to, both the rulers and the ruled. Now, an incident in the seerah in which, when the Prophet ﷺ, he first received revelation, he was overwhelmed. Wouldn't you be? If an angel came and squeezed you so hard that you thought your ribs would break, and then gave you this command to recite. So he comes back to his home, and he's just overwhelmed by it. And he wants his wife, Khadija, to cover him up. and he's afraid that something's bad is happening. And Khadija assures him that, you know, you're a good person. You treat everybody well. You have a concern for the poor. You've done this and that. And there's no way that Allah would treat you badly. And she takes him to her cousin, who is a Christian, very rare in the society in which he lived. And when the Prophet ﷺ describes his experience, this Christian, he was learned in Christianity. He'd taken the effort to study somehow. He said, this is the namus. What's come to you is the namus that came to Musa. It's the same namus. Now, in modern Arabic, namus means mosquito. And so it's a bit of a puzzling term. And the standard explanation of what that means is that it's the angel, you know, and I'm not exactly sure of all the linguistic considerations for why they interpreted it like that. But I've read a counter interpretation that to me makes a lot of sense. This man who was a Christian, he had studied Christianity, and because of that, there are terms in a religion, even if you don't speak Arabic, there are Arabic terms that have entered your language, and you know what they mean, even though you can't speak Arabic. So Sharia, I mean, basically every Muslim knows what Sharia means. And in the context of Christianity, there was a term, nomos, which means the law. It's a Greek word. And the teaching of Christianity was substantially a Greek thing in the ancient world. The oldest versions of the New Testament are written down in Greek. They're not written down in whatever language, Aramaic, that Jesus spoke. So when this learned Christian, he said that if we interpret that as that what he really was saying was nomos, and that whatever narrator transmitted it didn't exactly know the meaning of the word, but just transmitted it to the best that they understood of what he was saying, then there would be this other corroborating evidence for that sense that the key thing that Moses brought was a law, and that what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was being given was also a law, a divinely revealed law. So now, to get back to Fir'aun, at the end of the previous episode, we said that one of his attitudes was that he treated his people with contempt or disdain. Istakhaffa qawmahu means, istakhaffa means, and it comes from the word khafif, which means light, and to treat someone lightly. Or when somebody has khiffatun fin nafs, it means that they're not all here. They're not playing with a full deck. So it's to treat them as stupid and with contempt. So he treated them in this disdainful manner. And the way that the Arabic is phrased, the conjunction used is fa. Now, it's usually translated into English as he treated his people with disdain and they followed him or they obeyed him. But fa in Arabic usually has a causal relationship. So one way to translate it would be, he treated them with disdain, so they followed him. So the way he treated them became a cause for them following him. And then the passage goes on to say that those people who did that were fasiqun. They were corrupt. And hopefully by the end of this episode we'll have a chance to read Sayyid Qutb's commentary on that particular verse. It's so potent, so powerful. Another feature of Fir'aun's rule was divide and conquer, or identify a minority in order to use hatred of the minority on the part of the majority to consolidate your rule. And if that's not relevant to the time we're living in, I don't know what is. So we see the verse in Surah Al-Qasas, إِنَّ فِرْعَوْنَ عَلَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفَةً مِنْهُمْ يُذَبِّحُ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيِي نِسَاءَهُمْ إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. Pharaoh made himself high and mighty in the land and divided the people into different groups. One group he oppressed. Okay, he singles out the one group. One group he oppressed, slaughtering their sons and sparing their women. He was one of those who spread corruption. And so, identifying a minority in order to focus the hatred of the majority upon them becomes a safety valve for the ruler. If anything's going wrong, it's their fault. So instead of people saying, wait a minute, you know, the way that you've got the society organized is causing problems. Instead of people saying that, they say, yeah, you're right, you know, it's all their fault. And so that's a great way to maintain power. And in another passage, Allah describes this same kind of behavior. فَأَرْسَلَ فِرْعَوْنُ فِي الْمَدَائِنِ حَاشِرِينَ. Pharaoh sent summoners to all the cities of the land. We're going to take a break and be back, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. So we're talking about this policy of singling out a minority group to focus the hatred of the majority. And we're starting to discuss this particular passage in which Fir'aun has sent summoners to the cities, all the cities of the land, to announce, إِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ شِرْذِمَةٌ قَلِيلٌ. These people are a puny band. They are a few only. وَإِنَّهُمْ لَنَا لَغَائِظُونَ. They have enraged us. Now, conceivably, this could be the king using the royal we. In other words, they have enraged me, because kings tend to use the word we when they're talking about me. Or conceivably, he could be talking about his society, that this puny band has enraged us all. وَإِنَّا لَجَمِيعٌ حَاذِرُونَ. So here it's clearly talking about the society as a whole, and we are a large group, or army, on the alert. And so what he was doing there was to get everybody to come out and join that army that was chasing down the people of Musa as they were trying to leave the land of Egypt. Now, in the previous episode, we were talking about the various groups who are identified in the Quran as being part of the Pharaonic system. So his nobles, Haman, the chief minister, the army, and the magicians. We talked about them very briefly. Let's look at them in a little more detail here. In one passage, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى بِآيَاتِنَا وَسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَقَارُونَ فَقَالُوا سَاحِرٌ كَذَّابٌ. Verily we sent Moses with our revelations and a clear warrant, meaning authority, and a sign that he is not talking from himself, that he has been sent. So that's the clear warrant. We sent Moses with our revelations and a clear warrant to Pharaoh and Haman and Qarun, but they said a lying sorcerer. So here you see Qarun was from the Bani Israel, and yet he is part of that group, that inner circle that's surrounding Fir'aun. And so they all have the exact same response to Musa and his message, that he's a lying sorcerer. Now we know that Qarun was fabulously wealthy. The Surah Qasas describes his wealth by saying that it would take a whole group of able-bodied men just to carry the keys to the warehouses of his wealth. And so he was fabulously wealthy. And he attributed that wealth to his own knowledge. And I know how to do business. I mean, there are various interpretations of what he meant by that, but the dominant modern interpretation is that he was good in business. He's saying, I know how to get things done, that's why I'm wealthy. But another thing that we see, if we look at modern states where there's a dictator and some kind of capitalists around him who are very wealthy, those are called crony capitalists. The reason that they're wealthy is because of their relationship with the ruler. And it's pretty unimaginable that in Fir'aun's land that a man like Qarun would have gotten wealthy without some kind of relationship with the ruler. And that indication is strengthened by the fact that Fir'aun and his chief minister and Qarun, they all have the same reaction to Moses when he first presents his message. And the passage goes on to say that when Moses brought them the truth from us, meaning from Allah, they said, and this includes Qarun, kill the sons of those who believe with him, spare only their women. So this is like the ultimate kind of betrayal that Qarun was involved in. I mean, his loyalty to Fir'aun, and it was not in any way loyalty to his ethnic group, which was the Bani Israel. They were an ethnic group and they had their own customs and their own beliefs. And he had been brought up in those beliefs, but they didn't mean anything to him. So he knew which side his bread was buttered on. He got wealthy because of his relationship with Fir'aun, and so he was going to defend him and that system with all his strength. Now, as we mentioned earlier, and we don't have time to go into it in detail, that the nobles, what they did was advise Fir'aun and propose policy. And the soldiers carried out those orders, carried out those policies. When it's talking about the children of Israel fleeing Egypt in Surah Yunus, فَأَتْبَعَهُمْ فِرْعَوْنُ وَجُنُودُهُ بَغْيًا وَعَدْوًا, and Pharaoh with his troops pursued them in rebellion and transgression. So the troops are loyal to someone who is a rebel against God, and so the same rule applies to them. And that same attitude of arrogance on the part of Fir'aun can be found in his army. It says, وَاسْتَكْبَرَ هُوَ وَجُنُودُهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْنَا لَا يُرْجَعُونَ. If you got a gun in your hand, this is the observation of Chris Hedges, who's a war correspondent for the New York Times for something like 15, 20 years. He said that these kids, who get dragged into these wars, which he covered in many continents, you put an AK-47 in the hands of a boy or a man, and he now has life and death power over anybody who doesn't have that same weapon. He thinks he's God on earth. Like that ruler Nimrud who said, "Ana uhyi wa umit." He thought he was divine because he had life and death power over people. So the army of Fir'aun, they also shared in his arrogance because they had life and death power. And when we look at Haman, of course he's mentioned in the books of tafsir as Fir'aun's chief minister. And as his chief minister, of course, he would have been involved in deliberations, policy deliberations. But there's another feature of what Haman does for Fir'aun that's highlighted in the Quran, which is that when Fir'aun wants something built, he gives the order to Haman, and Haman then oversees the project. And Fir'aun had this mega project in mind, which was building a tower to the heavens so he could climb up it and take a look and see if he could get a glimpse of this God that Musa was talking about. So building a really high tower, that's a mega project. And so he put Haman in charge of that project. And we know from Egyptian history that these chief ministers were frequently themselves priests, and that they were involved in building temples, which were these huge construction projects, and overseeing the building of the pyramids and stuff like that. So mega projects were very much a part of the Pharaonic culture. And in our time, we also have these huge mega projects. They're not usually related to places of worship or cemeteries. Pyramid is a glorified tomb. They're usually economic projects. And there are certain kinds of people who are the managers of these mega projects, and they're technocrats. So, of course, Haman is not a technocrat in the modern sense, but there's a certain amount of similarity. Now we come to the role of magicians. On some level, Fir'aun himself undertook to legitimize his own rule. Fir'aun caused a proclamation to be made among his people, saying, "O my people, is the kingdom of Egypt not mine? And these rivers that flow at my feet, are they not mine? Do you not see? Am I not better than this contemptible wretch who can scarcely express himself?" He doesn't even name him by name. He's talking about Musa alayhi salam. Why has he not been given any gold bracelets? Why have no angels come to accompany him? So he's comparing himself and contrasting himself with Musa. He has dominion over the land, and he's got gold bracelets on both arms and wearing something gold on his head, no doubt. And Musa doesn't have any gold. And if he really was a prophet, we should see these angels along with him. So Fir'aun took an active role in proclaiming his own legitimacy. But one of the major elements for shoring up the legitimacy of Fir'aun was the magicians. So when he's confronted with Musa alayhi salam, and Musa, he is challenged by Fir'aun, he throws down the stick. Fir'aun says, "Okay, you're giving us this rap, and how are we supposed to believe you? Give us some sign." And so when he threw down his staff, it turned into a snake. And this is a real challenge now. This is a real threat to Fir'aun's legitimacy, because here's somebody who's coming with a different concept, and he's got something really powerful to say that he's coming from God, not speaking on his own. We've run out of time here. Inshallah, we'll finish this topic in the final episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wallahu a'lam.
اقرأ أخيا ورتل القرآن اصدح بصوتك اسمع الأكوان اقرأ كلام الله داوي نفوسنا لنحس في أعماقنا الإيمان